The day my husband packed his bags and walked out, I thought my life was over. I sat on the kitchen floor for 2 hours, not crying, just silent, the kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful. It feels like the inside of an empty building after everyone has left. I had given 12 years of my life to a man who looked me in the eyes one morning and said, "I don't feel anything anymore." And just like that, he was gone. No warning, no fight, just absence where a person used to be. I was 41 years old, alone in a house too big for one person, and I had no idea what to do next. My sister suggested I try caregiving work. She said it would give me purpose. She said it would pull me out of my own head and put me inside someone else's story. For a while, I didn't believe her. But I was desperate enough to try anything. That was how I met Marcus Webb, and the first night I spent in his home changed everything I thought I knew about pain, survival, and what it means to be truly seen by another human being. His name, his identity, his reputation before I knew the truth. His name was Marcus Webb, 53 years old, a man who, from the outside, looked like someone the world had simply forgotten. He lived alone in a narrow house on Birchwood Lane, the kind of house where the porch light has been burned out for so long that no one remembers it was ever on. His neighbor, Mrs. Calloway, was the one who had arranged for the caregiving agency. She told them Marcus had episodes. She told them he was difficult. She told them he had sent away the last 3 caregivers within their first week. When the agency briefed me, I remember thinking, what kind of person sends away 3 people who are only trying to help? Was he violent? Was he cruel? Was he so deep inside his own darkness that he had forgotten how to let anyone near? And then a quieter thought followed that one. Was he perhaps not so different from me? What I did not know yet, what no one had told me, was that Marcus Webb had once been a completely different man, a father, a husband, an architect who had designed 3 public libraries in our city and whose name appeared on a bronze plaque inside the children's reading room of the Central Branch. The man I was about to meet was what remained after life had taken almost everything from him, and the question that would haunt me through that first night was this: when everything is taken from a person, when loss strips a man down to his very last layer, what is left? Is it bitterness? Is it rage? Or is it something far more heartbreaking than either? What I found when I walked through that door. I arrived at Marcus's house on a Tuesday evening in November. The sky was that particular shade of gray that feels personal, like the clouds are specifically meant for you. I knocked 3 times, nothing. I knocked again. A long silence, and then a voice from somewhere inside. "It's open." The house smelled like old coffee and cedar and something else I couldn't name at first, something like grief, if grief had a smell. The hallway was dark, books were stacked everywhere, and not carelessly, but in deliberate towers, like someone had organized a library and then abandoned the project halfway through. There were no photographs on the walls, not one. Marcus was sitting in the far corner of the living room in an armchair that had long since molded itself to the shape of his body. He didn't look up when I came in. He was holding a small piece of paper, folded and refolded so many times that the creases had gone soft. He held it the way you hold something you are afraid to look at, but more afraid to put down. I said, "Mr. Webb, I'm Sarah. I'll be your caregiver." He said nothing for a long moment. Then he looked up at me, and I want to tell you what was in his eyes because I have thought about it every day since. It was not anger. It was not suspicion. It was exhaustion, the kind of exhaustion that goes deeper than sleep can reach. And then he said, very quietly, "You'll leave by Friday." I told him I wasn't planning to. He looked back at his piece of paper, and that was our introduction. The night he told me about his life and why it shocked me. I had made him tea. He had asked for it black, no sugar, and I was sitting across the room trying to be present without being intrusive. The house was so quiet I could hear the clock in the hallway. And then, without warning, without any preamble at all, Marcus Webb began to talk. He said, I had a daughter. Her name was Lily. She was 7 years old when she died. He didn't look at me when he said it. He said it the way you say something you have rehearsed so many times in your own head that saying it out loud has lost most of its power, but not quite all of it. He said Lily had been diagnosed with a rare heart condition when she was 4. 3 years. He and his wife Rachel had moved between hospitals, between specialists, between moments of hope and months of despair. He said the hardest part was not the fear. The hardest part was watching Lily herself remain so completely, stubbornly, impossibly joyful through all of it. He said she used to draw pictures of their family in the hospital room, stick figures with enormous smiles. He said she always drew him tallest. What do you do with that kind of love? What do you do when joy and grief exist in exactly the same space at exactly the same time, and you have no choice but to hold both of them? And how does a person keep living in the ordinary world after the person who made the world feel real is gone? How loss destroyed what had once been love? After Lily died, Marcus told me the marriage lasted 14 months. He said 14 months like it was an achievement. Like he and Rachel had held on longer than either of them thought possible. And maybe they had. He said grief does something too, to people that no one warns you about. He said it does not bring you together the way people promise at funerals. He said it pulls you into yourself so completely that you stop being able to see the other person. You look across the table at someone you have loved for 20 years and you see only your own loss reflected back at you, and it is simply too much to bear. Rachel had left in the spring. She had not been cruel about it. She had sat down with Marcus one morning. He remembered it was raining, and she had said, I cannot be the person who helps you heal. I am too broken myself. He said he had not fought her. He said he had not even been angry. He said he had felt something worse than anger. He had felt relieved, and then immediately ashamed of the relief, and that shame had lived inside him ever since. After Rachel left, Marcus stopped designing. He told the firm he needed time. Time became months. Months became 3 years. The architecture firm eventually let him go with a kind letter and a generous severance that he barely registered receiving. He said there were long stretches, weeks at a time, when he did not leave the house. He said there were days when the only reason he got out of bed was because a neighbor's dog would bark at a certain time every morning, and the sound was so ordinary, so utterly indifferent to his suffering, that it reminded him the world was still running whether he participated in it or not. Is that what survival looks like for some people, clinging to the sound of a dog barking because it is the most alive thing within reach? Where the pain had actually begun, long before Lily, long before Rachel. I asked him gently if he had always found it hard to let people in. He was quiet for a long time, and then he told me about his father. Marcus had grown up in a mill town in Pennsylvania. His father, Robert Webb, was a steelworker, a man who believed that silence was strength and that asking for help was a form of weakness so complete it was practically shameful. Marcus said his father never once told him he loved him, not once in his entire childhood. He said there was food on the table and clothes on his back, and he understood intellectually that this was a form of love, but the body does not understand intellectual love. The body needs to hear the words. The body needs to be held. And Marcus said he had spent his whole life chasing something he could not name because no one had ever shown him what it looked like. He had thrown himself into architecture because buildings, at least, made sense. You designed something. You built it according to plan. The structure either held or it didn't, and if it didn't, you could find exactly the point where the calculation had gone wrong. People were not like that. People collapsed without warning at joints you had never thought to reinforce. He said he had thought that marrying Rachel, that having Lily, had finally given him the thing his father never did. He said he had been right. And losing it had not just been the loss of a daughter and a marriage. It had been the loss of the only proof he had ever had that he was capable of being loved. When a person loses not just the people they love but the evidence of their own worth, what does that do to a human soul? And how does the world expect such a person to simply continue? What was in his hand, the secret he had never told anyone? It was past midnight when I finally asked about the piece of paper. I had been noticing it all evening. He had set it on the armrest, but his hand kept returning to it, fingers resting lightly on the fold as though checking to make sure it was still there. He picked it up. He looked at it. And then he held it out to me. It was a drawing, done in purple crayon. A family of stick figures, 3 of them, standing in front of a house with a triangular roof and flowers in the yard. Above the tallest figure, in a child's handwriting, were the words, "My daddy is the best architect in the world." It had been laminated at some point, probably by Marcus himself, but the lamination was cracked now from being folded and unfolded so many thousands of times. At the bottom corner, in the same purple crayon, was a signature, Lily, age 6. I did not say anything. There was nothing to say. I just held it carefully with both hands, the way you hold something irreplaceable, and I looked at it for a long time. And when I looked up Marcus Webb, this man who had sent away 3 caregivers, this man who had not cried in public since his daughter's funeral, had tears running quietly down his face. He did not wipe them. He just let them fall. And I understood that this was not a sign of weakness. This was a man who had finally, in the presence of another human being, allowed himself to feel what he had been carrying alone for 6 years. What is the weight of grief that has never been witnessed? What does it do to a person to mourn entirely in private, with no one to say, "I see you. I see what you are carrying. You do not have to carry it alone." The moment I stopped being a caregiver and became a person, I don't know what made me do it. Professional training would have told me to maintain boundaries, to stay in my role, to be supportive but separate. But Marcus had just shown me the most sacred thing in his possession, and something in me understood that the only honest response was honesty of my own. I told him my husband had left me. I told him about the kitchen floor. I told him about the silence that wasn't peaceful. I told him that I had come to his house partly to help him and partly because I had nowhere else to put myself, because being useful to someone else was the only way I had found to survive the feeling that I was no longer useful to anyone. Marcus looked at me for a long time after I said that. And then he said something I have written down and kept. Loss is strange. It makes you feel invisible. Like you have become a ghost in your own life and everyone. Around you can walk right through you and not feel a thing, but sitting here right now, I don't feel invisible. He paused. Do you? I said no, I didn't. Was that the moment something shifted? Was that the moment? 2 broken people in a dark living room in November stopped being a caregiver and a client and became, simply, 2 human beings who understood each other. How the story continued and what Marcus found his way back to. I did not leave by Friday. I stayed the full month the agency had scheduled, and then Marcus asked if I would stay another. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, things in the house began to change. The porch light got a new bulb. The towers of books were organized onto shelves. One morning, I arrived to find Marcus at the kitchen table with a large sheet of drafting paper in front of him, his first architectural sketch in 3 years. He said it was nothing, just something to keep his hands busy. But his hands were steady, and his eyes were alive in a way I had not seen in them before. He began to talk about Lily more freely, not always with pears, sometimes with laughter. He told me about the time she had decided she wanted to be a paleontologist and had attempted to dig a fossil out of their backyard and crack the garden hose pipe in the process. He told me about the songs she used to sing in the car and made up songs with completely nonsensical lyrics that she delivered with absolute conviction. He said she had his stubbornness and Rachel's laugh and something entirely her own that he could never fully describe, but recognized instantly as the best part of everything he had ever been. Marcus Webb was not healed. Grief does not work that way, and anyone who tells you otherwise has not lost enough yet. But he was present. He was here. He was inside his own life again rather than sitting at its edge watching it happen without him. And I found that watching him return to himself had quietly, without my noticing, helped me return to myself as well. What do broken people taught each other without trying? People ask me sometimes why I stayed. Why I didn't do what the 3 caregivers before me had done and walk out when it was clear this assignment would not be easy. And the honest answer is this: I recognized something in Marcus Webb from the very first night. I recognize the particular shape of a person who has loved deeply and lost completely and does not know how to ask for help because no one ever taught them that asking is allowed. My husband leaving taught me that I had spent 12 years being careful. Careful not to need too much. Careful not to say too much. Careful to be pleasant and low maintenance and easy to be around. Because somewhere along the way I had learned, the way Marcus had learned from his father, that need was inconvenient and that love was conditional on being easy to love. Marcus Webb, sitting in his dark living room holding his daughter's crayon drawing, taught me in a single night that the bravest thing a person can do is simply let another human being see them as they actually are, not performing, not managing, not making themselves smaller so as not to inconvenience anyone, just real. Tired and real and still here, somehow against all odds. What is it that we lose when we are never taught that our pain is worth witnessing? And what becomes possible, even late, even after enormous loss, when someone finally looks at us and stays? Marcus Webb continued sketching. By spring, he had a full set of plans, a small community garden pavilion he had designed pro bono for the neighborhood association on Birchwood Lane, Mrs. Calloway cried when she saw the rendering. I did too, quietly, standing at the kitchen counter. He placed a framed copy of Lily's drawing on the wall of his study, the first thing to go up on any wall in that house in 6 years. Beside it, he put a small card that read, "Best architect in the world, she said so." I am not going to tell you that grief ends. I am not going to tell you that time heals all wounds, because I have sat with enough pain, my own and other people's, to know that is not entirely true. What I will tell you is this: grief, when it is witnessed, when someone sits with you in the dark and does not flinch and does not leave, becomes something slightly different. It does not disappear, but it shifts. It makes room for something else alongside it. Marcus taught me that, and maybe I taught him something too. 2 people, each invisible in their own way, finding each other in a narrow house on Birchwood Lane on a gray November evening. The porch light was dark when I arrived. When I left for the last time that spring, it was on. If you are carrying something heavy right now, if you are sitting in your own dark living room wondering if anyone will ever really see you, I want you to know the light can still come on. Sometimes it just takes someone knocking on the door and not leaving when you tell them they will.